What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 326. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas, LSV. How are you, sir?
I'm doing quite well. And do you not announce that you're from Seattle, or is you just assume the listeners know?
I don't know. I never think of it. I'm too excited to start talking to you. No, I'm not. I love living in Seattle. Though today it was kind of a pain.
Marshall actually lives in Vancouver.
No, I would, but I don't. I had plumbing issues today, Luis. I had water just flowing into my my laundry
let's just
room.
Move on to the show.
Yeah.
You so interrupt your monologues.
So check this out. The water came in out of the wall. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, I got it all sorted out today, though, and I'm pretty happy to be done with that and on to the fun stuff, aka recording the podcast. So this week on the show, we're going to be talking about Sealed Deck. This is one that we like to do for each set, basically, to touch on Sealed and get an idea for it. It's a really important format, mainly because it is the way that you do well at day one of a GP, or in a lot of the PPTQs and such are played with Sealed. So you do need to get good at it. You can't just fully focus on draft. And even though there's overlap, there are enough differences for us to point them out. So we're going to be getting into that. We're also going to touch on Team Limited. That's going to be at the tail end of the episode. We're going to put in a section of that for people that are playing in Washington, DC, which is where the GP is in a couple of weeks. That's Team Limited. Or for people that want to play in any other Team Limited event, we're going to touch on that too. Before we get into all that, though, I want to remind you that Limited Resources is brought to you by ChannelFireball.com. Make sure you check out Channel Fireball for all of your Magic needs. They have it all over there. You can find singles. You can find sealed products, so you can, get your draft on with your friends, get a box, or you can even, split up the pack so that you can do some current set drafting with a group of your friends at home. Or if you just need some supplies, they've got that too. They've got sleeves, they've got deck boxes, they even have apparel, Limited Resources t-shirts, for example, Channel Fireball gear. You can find it all over there. And of course, you can go there day after day because they have awesome free content every single day over there. You're going to find articles and videos and even podcasts like this one from some of the best players in the world, all looking towards one goal, and that's getting you better at Magic. You can find it all at channelfireball.com. You can also support the show directly via Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/limitedresources, and we're going to be doing a giveaway next week. And I got some pretty sweet giveaways lined up, Luis. I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I've kind of accrued over the last year or so.
What of that stuff am I eligible for?
You are eligible for none of it, especially until you send me the Pack Fresh Alpha the Hive. Which I mean, maybe it got lost in the mail, or you just haven't.
I meant to give it to you in Houston, but I guess maybe I'll bring it to Detroit.
There you go. So you are ineligible, but anybody who is a patron is. So if you're on the Patreon for any amount, it can be $1 a show. That's no problem at all, and you'll be on the list. And I'm going to be giving away a bunch of stuff next week. I'm going to give away our normal giveaway, which is the rares from our Crack-A-Packs, going back to the previous giveaway, as well as Limited Resources sleeves, sticker, pin, and a t-shirt for the winner. We give away those every month and a half once kind of the pile gets big enough. But I've got extra giveaways that I'm going to be throwing in over the next few weeks as well. So if you want to get eligible for that, just head over to the Patreon and sign up, and you'll be eligible. The other cool thing you get is that you can submit questions for the question of the week. This one is from William, who says, after listening to your step-by-step draft episode, a question came up for me. Assuming an average draft deck to that point, how good does an off-color rare or mythic have to be to take it pack 3, pick 1? So, we mentioned last week, Luis, that we are pretty firmly in our colors by this point. Remember, we've already drafted 2 full packs. So he's asking, what is it going to take? And he actually throws us an example. He says, in triple BFC, I could be in blue-black control, but I'm probably going to take that Gideon to splash monetary value aside. He says that they rare redraft at the store, so it's not about money. It's just about power. And so this brought up a couple of good points, I think, Luis. The first one is, don't splash double-colored cards. Don't do that. That's asking for a disaster. I think I would just pass the Gideon if I was solidly in blue-black control, and I wouldn't try to splash it. But to William's bigger picture question, how good does that rare have to be to either move in or consider splashing?
Yeah, I like you said, I disagree with the fundamental. I would take Gideon in blue-black just because a double-color card is generally not a good card you want to take if your deck is decent. Mm-hmm. So it's tough. Basically, if your deck is good going into pack 3, you should not be switching colors basically under any circumstances. Like, to put it to this format, what if you're blue-black in this format and even like pack 2, you open a Chandra, that's a tough decision. You probably take it. Move that to pack 3, and I guess it would be getting at that point since Chandra's not in pack 3. You just shouldn't be taking it. You're the worse your deck is, the more likely you should be doing something like this, and that's one of the things we mentioned last week as well, where when your deck's a 3 out of 10, yeah, take that Gideon. That's going to give you the highest win percentage because your deck's just not going to beat a normal deck in a normal game. When your deck's like a 7 out of 10, you're just going to make it worse by taking Gideon. Like, you can't play a blue-black deck with 5 planes in it because then you just can't cast any of your spells, and switching into a new color just means you have to throw away a bunch of cards. You're probably going to be too many picks short.
Right. And yeah, splashing those double colors is just not a thing. It is just so, I mean, I guess there are some mana bases that could exist. There's always exceptions, but I can count the number of times I've splashed double colored cards on one hand. I mean, it is very, very few. And I get pretty ambitious late in a format, but you really, really, like, I just think it's just not really justifiable. You either are playing that color or, maybe you can work your deck around where you take the Gideon, you take some mediocre or even good white cards, and then you cut down on maybe the color that you had the fewest number of playables in. That could be a scenario that I could see popping up that might accommodate a Gideon, but you're doing a major shift of your deck at that point.
So It gets a little more interesting, just real quick, when it's a single color card. Like,
right.
let's say something like Fall of the Titans. Let's say you could open that in pack 3. I understand you can't, but let's say you are, again, blue-black, and you open a card at that level, like
Drowner of Hope, maybe.
Drowner of Hope's a perfect example. And if you have no fixing and there's a good card for you, a lot of times you should take the other card. Like you're red-white. You have no fixing, and you open Drowner of Hope and Touch of the Void. You should just take Touch of the Void.
Right.
But what if you're like red-green and you just happen to have, 1 or 2 green cards that can fix your mana?
Right.
Then all of a sudden it gets a lot more plausible. And the other thing is, going back to the previous example, what if you're red-white and you open Drowner, but your pick otherwise would be something like a McKindy Patrol, just something horrible, like 2/3 Vigilance for 3.
Right.
There I would just take Drowner and just hope to pick up an Evolving Wilds, or a Prairie Stream or a Pilgrim's Eye or whatever, because you're not really giving up much. So you generally should still not be taking these off-color rares. You're not moving into a new color, but the single color ones you can often splash.
Yeah. The mistake I see a lot is that people just automatically will pick that off-color rare and just assume that they should splash. And one thing I like to do is look at my deck and think about it in terms of what its game plan is. Because, like you used red-white as the example. And red-white typically is a much more curve-based aggressive deck, right? It wants to hit its land drops. It wants to hit its creatures. It wants to remove your stuff and beat you down. And, that's a kind of deck that I would much rather have a Touch of the Void in than an off-color, even a bomb like a Drowner of Hope. But, let's say I was black-white, right? A deck that's looking to slow things down and kind of grind out the game a lot more. A Drowner of Hope is something I would take over even a decent white card or black card in that scenario, because I think that the game is likely to go long. And the longer the game is likely to go, the better the chance I have to hit both my mana and the card that I'm splashing for and be able to cast it. So just keep that in mind too, is how does this fit into, if you have this like beautiful aggro curve out deck, you don't need to go, traipsing off looking for bombs. You're under less pressure to do so, and it's less likely that they will help you as well. Okay, let's crack a pack, Luis, and then we'll get to the main topic. This pack comes from Sol Schaefer. Thank you, Sol, for this. And like I said, next week on the show, we're going to be giving away all of the rares that I have from the last few.
To who?
I don't know yet. You're not eligible, though. Searing Light. So that's the the white instant, destroy target attacking or blocking creature with power 2 or less. No, we're not first picking it. Negate, no.
Yeah, I also don't even like Searing Light much at all.
Yeah. Mauve Kozilek.
This is the 2/5 for 4.
Yeah.
With colorless gets +2, -2. I like the card, but it's been less exciting than I thought it would be when I first saw it. When I first thought it, I'm like, wow, this would be a really good addition to these like red colorless control-ish or mid-range decks, and it just turns out the red decks want to be ally beatdown. They want to curve out in a saddleback. If they're red-green, there's just not an Eldrazi Devoid, like a red-black Devoid deck. There's not a red colorless control deck. So basically this is a playable card, but it's just not an exciting one.
Yeah. Zulaport Chain Mage. No.
I don't mind it, but it's gone up in value, but it's a finisher for allies, but that's about it.
Yeah, and I think one of the beautiful things about Zulaport Chain Mage is that you do get them later. You can get them, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th in that range, and they'll serve a relatively important role in your deck, but you don't have to first pick it to get it done. Here's your buddy Saddleback.
Saddleback Lagak is a good one. If you can curve out into a 3/1 support 2, you can just win the game most of the time. I'm actually starting to like Stalking Drone more. But
Cuneo gotcha, huh?
Yeah, part of it is that I'm not looking to take either of these cards in the first couple of picks, so you just have a lot more information as to what you're looking to do, and that I like blue green a little more than I used to.
Okay, yeah, I'm still on Saddleback as best green common. I think it's better than Stalking Drone, but whatever, they're both good. Tarsnare.
Tarsnare is
very mediocre.
The question of how mediocre is removable for you wouldn't play it. Tarsnare hits that level. I've just not played it in plenty of black decks. Just -3, -2 is not enough to kill a lot of the creatures.
No, I think the best way to look at it is think of it in terms of how much mana would you pay to basically do 2 damage to a creature. And, that usually comes in around the 2 mana mark, occasionally the 1 mana mark, and almost never the 3. Now, you do get the additional upside of being able to enter combat with the creature and kill most things with a Tarsnare, so it does pull its weight, but it is it is just not efficient enough that I'm often happy bringing it out of the sideboard to kill a utility creature or against the right type of deck, but it can sit in your hand against some lists, and it's really annoying. Ooh, here's one, Boulder Salvo.
All right, well, this is the first card I would certainly consider taking first. Boulder Salvo is right about the level where if you first pick it, you're like, all right, this card's pretty good.
Yeah.
But I would say
you were hoping for a better common or a rare or uncommon.
It's a good consolation prize when you don't have an actual first pick, but Boulder Salvo is still a fine card.
Poor Boulder Salvo. Unknown Shores. Nah. Whatever.
I like the colorless lands, but I'm not taking them over Boulder Salvo.
Yeah. All right, we got a little bit of a contender here. Here's a Blinding Drone.
All right, well, Blinding Drone and Boulder Salvo both pretty good first picks. I think Blinding Drone's a better card if it works, but it's going to be a lot easier to play Boulder Salvo. So I'm still in the Boulder Salvo camp at this point.
I am too. I have Salvo Drone and Lagak kind of pulled aside here. Kozilek's Pathfinder, the 6 mana 5/5. We're not going to take that here. All right, that brings us to our uncommons, where our first one is Null Collar. That's the 3 and a black 2/4. Vampire Shaman, and you can pay 3 and a black and exile a creature card from your graveyard, and you get a 2/2 zombie. I kind of, when I first read this, I figured that this would be a perfectly reasonable kind of grind card, after you've shields up, as it were, you could start to grind out value. But man, I have just found this card to be a little too clunky to make it work. Where are you at on Null Collar?
Again, I had high hopes for this card, but it does not work. So this is, I think, worse than all the commons we've laid out so far.
Is it the price? Is it the 3 and a black to exile a creature? Is that what the problem is?
Yeah, I think
is it the fact that it's not an ally, maybe?
That contributes. It's just all of those things. This is one of those cards that's probably, if you turn to activate it into 2 mana, the card becomes excellent. And if you turn it into 3 mana, maybe it's playable. But at 4 mana, it just doesn't do the thing it's supposed to do, which is to make you zombies. Also, they're just randomly tapped.
Not these ones.
Oh, these are not the ones that are tapped?
No, the ones from the ally.
Oh, it's the rare one that's tapped.
Yeah, those are
That
tapped.
is confusing.
Yeah, that is weird.
I do not like that.
Yeah, these are very lively zombies, fresh out of the Starbucks. Cinder Barons. So that's the tap land that makes red or black. I'm not going to first pick it. Here's a card, maybe slightly controversial. It's Flame Tendrils, the 1 black sorcery with the void, and all creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. And if a creature would die this turn, you exile it.
This is an exciting card. I think it's a really awesome addition to the constructed metagame. I don't think it's a card that I'm really.
Oh man, I was getting my sabers ready to wrap.
Yeah, this is a great sideboard card. You can even main deck it if your deck has a lot of creatures that are resilient to it. It's a fine main deck card again if your creatures don't die to it, but it's not a card that I'm really over the moon about. There's just too many decks that you play this against. First of all, it's hard to cast, double black. You need it early for it to be really effective, and there's just some decks just doesn't kill anything.
Yeah. I think the real backbreaker for Flame Tendrils is support as well. Is sometimes by the time you get your Flame Tendrils online, even the things you were going to kill have a random +1/+1 counter on them and have gotten out of range. You're kind of licking your chops when you see your opponent curving out with their, core Sky Climbers and stuff. And then, they're like Saddleback Lagak, and you're like, well, I guess I'll get that. But So yeah, not quite good. Okay, now we've got a rare. It's a solid rare here too. It's Sifter of Skulls. This is the 3 and a black 4/3 Eldrazi with Devoid, and whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you get a Scion.
I like Sifter.
I am medium on Sifter. I have had a chance to play it 3 or 4 times, and I got to say, I thought it was a little better than it actually plays out as. It's good. There's no complaints on Sifter of Skulls, but it is not in that bomb territory, you know, where you're looking at it like, oh, we got a Sifter, we're doing it, kiddos. It's not like that.
Yeah, it's kind of like Null Collar, but just a couple levels higher. Where clearly Sifter's always playable. It's 4 mana 4/3 with a good ability. That's good, but it's not great. It looks like it should be great, and in fact, it's just good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like if this was an uncommon, I would be like, oh, okay, cool, right? Like it doesn't have that power bump that you would see often at rare.
Yeah,
I mean, it would be a weird uncommon. Don't get me. You know, I just mean like on power level.
No, you could make this an uncommon. I think that card would work. But yeah, I have it below the 2 good removal spells and above the Saddleback, I think.
Agreed. Yep, I agree.
So I would lean towards just taking Boulder Salvo here. I would not fault you for taking Blinding Drone if you heavily lean in that direction. I would fault you for taking Saddleback or Sifter, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for me, like it does come down to the Boulder Salvo and I think the Sifter, I don't know. Like I think the Blinding Drone, again, it is a first pick quality card, but that's only if you end up being in the right deck that can actually use it. And that is a lot of baggage when, you know, my best Blinding Drone decks are when I'm kind of leaning in that direction anyway. And then, you know, 4th pick, here comes a Blinding Drone. I'm like, okay, I'll be that person. You know, if those people to my right don't want to be that, I'll be the Blinding Drone player here. And now I know that there's like a little bit of breathing room on it, where if you take it first, you're kind of committing super hard. I think I would end up taking the Boulder Salvo here, though. I think it's the most solid card. I think Blinding Drone, and I think Sifter is also defensible.
Yeah.
All right. So that's it for the Crack-A-Pack. I will put that with the rest of them. And like I said, we're going to be giving those away next week. And then, like I said, I've got some other cool giveaways. So let's go there. Okay, so let's get into this, Luis. We're going to start off with sealed deck, and we'll do some sort of general sealed deck tips, and then we'll move into Oath of the Gatewatch specific sealed deck stuff, and then we're going to wrap up with team sealed for those people that are going to the GP in DC.
Yeah, it sounds like a plan. The general sealed stuff is just like procedural stuff that, you know, definitely has.
Oh, I should mention something, Luis, before we get into it.
Sure.
The leagues.
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah, we should kick off.
I mean,
with
this is how we prepared for this largely.
It is absolutely. So, really big news for Magic Online. Sealed leagues went live this week, and I got to tell you, Luis, this is how I started playing Magic Online way back in the day. This was when it first came out, and it was the beta. And I played in sealed leagues that they were testing for it at the time. And then after it was over, I didn't play anymore until, you know, I came back to the game. But sealed leagues are really cool. They are, you know, the closest thing that we have to on-demand style limited, right? And basically, I'll just run down how it works. You enter the league. You pay the cost to get in. You open up your 6 booster packs just like you would in any sealed event. And now you have as much time as you want to build as many iterations of your deck as you choose. You can just sit there and pore over it for an hour, turn off Magic Online, you know, go run an errand, come back, turn it back on, look at it again. You can save out as many builds as you want. And when you go to play a match, you can take any deck of those builds that you want. It's not like a normal sealed tournament where you have to play the deck that you submitted first in the first game, and then you can switch to whatever. You can just switch to whatever in between. So you can kind of constantly tweak the build as you go. You get to play 5 matches, and it's like a matchmaking style system. So it's going to play you, you know, ideally against somebody with a similar record and that kind of thing. And if you get 3 and 2 or better, you are going to get prizes. So if you win 3 matches, 4 matches, or 5 matches, then you're going to make it into the prizes, and that's it. And again, you don't have to play them in a row. You can leave for 2 days, come back and play round number 2, and then you can play 2, 3, and 4, and then leave for 3 days and come back and play 5. And I got to tell you, for pure convenience sake, it is amazing to be able to play Magic on this level. So I certainly recommend, if you want to get better at sealed, to go check out the leagues on Magic Online. And like you said, I mean, I did 6. It came out yesterday, and I've done 6 of the things, because you can just bang right through them, and they're
especially
really fun.
If you're only playing like 2 or 3 rounds. Yeah.
I did quite well in them, thank you.
Yeah, I saw the pictures actually. But one of the things that's great too is you can just constantly deck build. There's no time limit on that. The first league I did, I opened my deck and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna continue doing something else. I'm like, oh wait, don't I have to finish this deck? It's like, no, you can just do it whenever you want.
Oh, so, it's such a good feeling.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So sealed leagues are on Magic Online, and they're a great way to practice. And so I wanted to make sure to mention that to our listeners. But why don't you give us some tips as to how to approach this? Is that
because we're a sponsored podcast with a conflict of interest? Is that why we're talking?
Well, if we were sponsored, we might have one, but we're not. Well, we're sponsored, just not by Wizards.
Yes, sorry. That was in regarding to our Patreon question.
Yeah, I like. We should do a little jingle like "Go play leagues, ding da ding."
Honestly, the leagues are great, so I feel no shame in saying that. No. But so I want to talk about some general sealed things, which I tend to go through almost every sealed format, and then move into the more specific. And so the first is sort by rarity. Just always look at your rares. That's the first thing I do. It's the most fun also. Yeah. Because in sealed, you're supposed to play your best cards. That is the challenge that you're trying to overcome. Sort by color is next. And this is obviously a lot easier on Magic Online, and you can just click twice. But even in real life, what you're going to actually do is sort by colors, then sort by rarity, then pull up just your rares.
Yeah. Oftentimes you'll have a peek at them as you're sorting.
Yeah. Formats where there are gold cards, of which this is one. The gold cards are a really big pull in a specific direction because gold cards tend to be powerful. That's why they're gold. And they really do give you some handholds. I had a sealed where I opened 3 black-white gold cards. And it's just like, okay, well, I guess I'm playing black-white. Drana's Emissary, Cliffhaven Vampire, and Eiley, the Eternal Pilgrim. So it's like, well, that wasn't very hard because there's just 3 insane cards if I compare these 2 colors together. So checking out your gold cards is very important. Formats like this, check your lands. There are duels in this format. There's Evolving Wilds. There are wastes and colorless lands. So knowing what your mana restrictions are is pretty big. I remember in original Ravnica Sealed, your bounce lands did a huge portion of the work for you. As in, if you opened 2 blue-black and a black-green bounce land, you were probably playing Bug.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Just because the multicolor lands, they're like gold cards, except in the unfun way. The gold cards are the fun, like, ooh, what's the presents I get to open? The lands are like what's my budget?
Yeah.
How many presents can I buy?
Yeah.
So, I mean, sometimes you have a good red-green deck and you have an Exert Influence, but you have no lands and you have double color in each color. And you're just like, well, I'm not going to play it. But sometimes you have like a green-black deck and you have a blue-black land and an Evolving Wilds, then it's just, yeah, of course I'm going to play Exert Influence. So, or Drowner or whatever,
Right.
So the lands are important. For time pressure, and this is more when you're doing like tournaments, but it's good practice to get into, is getting good at sorting cards into playable and unplayable, and then sorting an additional level, which is great, playable, and unplayable. So to use our rating system, you want to take out all the Ds and Fs as quickly as possible because those just do not impact the colors you choose. And then you separate the Cs from the Bs and the As. The As and the Bs are what pull you in a specific direction. And the A's and A pluses especially are like, I opened a Wingbait Rock. All right, let's just do what I can to play white. But looking at the A's and the B's is important for that. And then you do have to look at the C's, though. Sometimes it's like, I opened Wingmate Rock. I have 5 total playable white cards. This is just not a color I can play. Though I guess right. In Cons it was 3 colors, so that's a little different. It's more like I opened Chandra, in Oath of the Gatewatch. Yeah. But I have 5 total playable red cards, and none of my other colors are deep enough to get me into a red right. deck, and that's fine. Sometimes that'll happen. Obviously, you end up looking through the pile of terrible cards over and over again, because sometimes you'll find some gems in there that you just need, like to fill out a deck or something like that.
Or maybe your deck's the exception where a card gets good. I had an example of that. Yeah, maybe, probably not, but I did have an example of that. That I was playing a deck that had 2 Baloth Null Drifters in it and a Pulse of Marasa, and I ended up playing an Oath of Jace, which is a card I'm not really a big fan of. But I ended up playing it because incidentally...
that's also just a card you should always play in sealed because it's great.
Do you really think so?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't like Oath of Jace even in sealed that much, but I did like it in this deck because I got to synergize.
It's especially great with the cards you just mentioned.
Yeah, and so I made the exception to play it. But I'll tell you what, it wasn't in my initial build. Like when I had it lined up, I was like, not really a big fan of this one. And I'm still not. You really like that card, huh?
I think in general the format in sealed especially is slow enough that
card selection.
Yeah, you're not going up cards, but you're not going down cards either. You're just cycling a bunch, and cycling a bunch is great when the games take a long time and you're playing 18 lands. So,
okay,
but regardless,
yeah,
getting being able to practice removing the bad cards quickly is a valuable skill, both because it reduces your mental load, right? You just don't have to. It's another thing you don't have to pay attention to. Like when you first look at a pile of cards,
it's overwhelming. Yeah,
it is overwhelming, and it's the sort of thing you have 84 cards to build with, and that's a lot of cards. But if you can take out like 20 or so of them, 25 of them, and just not have to worry about them until you've gotten your deck set, and then you're just like looking through for anything you missed. That makes things easier. So that's a big part of the process. And this is one where when you practice, you get a lot more adept at doing it, because you start to know that you just don't need to pay attention to the ruin in their wakes of the set. And, that list of cards is a lot easier to determine without really thinking.
Yeah. And this is what I do too. In fact, I lay them out into rows. Like I do columns by color and then rows by the three that you listed, which are the cards that pull me into a color, the cards that'll probably make the cut if I'm in that color, and then the chaff, which I just get rid of, right? I just set that stuff aside. The truth of the matter is that in a modern current level limited format, the bar for entry to make it into your sealed deck is actually quite high. There will be pretty decent cards that end up not making the cut in your color sometimes. We're
at 6-pack sealed now. That's the biggest difference. Sealed was 5-packs for a long time.
Oh, with the what do they call those starter deck things?
Well, it was first a starter and 2 boosters, but even after starters were gone, it was 5 packs. 6-pack sealed is significantly different.
Oh, I did not realize that they made it. When did that change happen?
Not that long. Well, a couple of years ago now, but not like so long ago.
Dude, it was a long time ago.
I wish it was 5 packs. Anyway.
Okay, I was because I think it was 6 when I came back, which was like Shadowmoor.
Yeah.
I think. Am I wrong? Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, but I think that the increase in packs, but also the fact that the average card quality went up. This is something that Cuneo mentioned as well. Is that you can kind of just pick cards in your color and end up with a deck that at least doesn't have any completely embarrassing cards, which wasn't always the case.
Well, I think it's just people didn't have fun if you didn't know what you're doing, you ended up with 17 playables.
Yeah. Well, some people had fun, but yeah. Yeah. Right. And I mean, there's still edge to be gained there. It's just not quite as wide. So
looking at specific Oath of the Gatewatch stuff.
Yes. Let's get into this.
I think so that some of the useful things to think of are, what do decks tend to look like? And one of them here is that most decks are playing more than 2 colors.
Yes.
For this purpose, we're going to count colorless as a color because it is essentially that, right? When you play two wastes in your black-white deck, it's kind of like you're splashing red, except it's just splashing the colorless cards instead. So most decks are going to be two main colors plus a couple cards of either a third color or colorless cards with a couple lands to kind of enable that.
Yeah, and from what I found, well, I'll tell you what. So I did 6 of these leagues, and I had multiple builds in a couple of the leagues as well that I actually played. And I actually tried to look it up, but you have to manually save those decks if you want to go back and look at them outside of your last league deck. But off the top of my head, out of all those builds, so 6 main plus I think 2 side builds that I submitted that weren't just sideboarding, but were like a different deck. I think only one of them was just pure 2 color, like with no colorless and no splash of any other color. Every other one had splashes. And, I got to say, I kind of like being greedy here. I think that the decks should look very powerful from a card power level standpoint when you just look at them, and that's discounting the fact that you may be splashing around a little bit too. Yeah,
I think that a lot of what's going to guide that, like we said before, are actually the lands. So
yes, and I'll tell you what too. I think the smallest number of colorless mana sources that I had was 4 out of those sealed decks. And I had as many as 6 to 8, different ways to make colorless mana. And then a lot of those were, kind of double, right? Like your holdout settlements and that kind of card that does let you splash, for a single color of mana as well. Same thing with the crumbling vestiges and and that kind of stuff. And so, I found reasonable splashes to be not hard at all. But they felt like I felt like I basically always had the tools to do it if I wanted to.
I never felt pinched. I mean, it's going to happen. Like, so
it will.
If this happens to you, you don't need to let us know that we're wrong and you opened a thought not seer and no wastes or whatever. That'll happen to some people.
I mean, nobody plays waste anyway, but.
But yeah, I found that in general, you actually have more color sources than you tend to need.
Yes.
You don't want to play 3 wastes in your deck. You'd rather play a Holdout Settlement, a Crumbling Vestige, a Waste, and an Evolving Wilds, and that'll be fine.
Yeah.
With Hedron Crawler and like Cultivator Drone backing those up. So the colorless, I think, has to be the most common splash, just because
absolutely
the colorless cards tend to be very powerful. Your rares like Reality Smasher or Eldrazi Displacer, but even cards like Spatial Contortion or Activating Essence Depleter. These are just great things to have. So that also pushes you towards blue or black, I think, a little bit more often than it would otherwise, because that's a sub-theme of those colors.
Totally.
Also green, because, Stalking Drone is great. So it's kind of interesting that you want to splash a color to make the power level of your sealeds go up, and it's just frequently going to be a color, in quotes, that just works with black, blue, or green. Another key piece of most decks is that they're just not aggressive. And we harp on this every time a sealed format comes around, because every now and then there are aggressive sealed formats, like original Zendikar with just red-black beat down all the way. But in this format, I mean, look at the things we just said. We said we're splashing another color. You're getting these powerful cards in your deck. A 3-color mana base tends to be a little slower just because you don't always curve out on time. So, yeah, I have not found aggro to be particularly good to build and have not played against impressive aggro decks. It's the sort of thing where every now and then you just have the actual curve that works and good support cards, like actual, cards with support that'll allow you to do this. But for the most part, if you think you can build an aggro deck, you probably are wrong.
That's been my experience, and not from the I'm going to build an aggro deck standpoint, but from when my opponent plays aggro decks, I'm kind of happy. Like, my decks are there. It's all 2/3s, high toughness creatures. Every removal spell I open in my colors, including a 3rd color often, is going to make the cut, and it makes life very difficult for these decks. Plus, I get to play my big game-ending bombs that a lot of the aggro decks just don't match up well against if the game goes into anything late. And I mean, I know that it's tough because we want to say the general thing on the show, right? But we know those decks do come together. I got smashed by one, right? It does happen, but you should keep an eye out in case everything is in place for that to happen, but you shouldn't be looking for that. Like your decks should be much slower. And I mean, they will tend to be much slower in the format. That's what I found, at least. I mean, every good deck I've had has been, effectively an inevitability in a control deck.
Yeah, and that's for a couple reasons. One is that you're just going to have a worse curve. You're not going to have enough 2-drops mainly under most circumstances. Right. And 2, everyone has more removal. The way sealed works, people have more removal and then they have more bombs just because they have more. They see more rares and they get to quote first pick them. They just get to keep them, and they have more removal. So aggro decks just tend to work a little less good because of that. Another thing to look at is your deck probably not heavily synergy based. You can have cards that work together. That's an upside. It's good to have Bailoff, Null Drifter, and Pulsar Marasa right in your control deck because those kind of have a little extra combo and all that. But you're probably not drafting a super linear deck because, again, first of all, you tend to have fewer pieces than you do in draft, and because your opponent has more ways to break it up.
Yeah, and this is pretty self-governing. Your pool will probably tell you you've got a few hints of a synergistic deck here, but not enough to make it worth it. And you'll have to just listen to what your pool's saying. That's just the fact of it, is it just for the most part, you'll see, just enough allies to make it look interesting. And then you'll be like, maybe not. You'll see just enough, colorless cares type cards to make it interesting, and then a little short. So, keep your eye out for it. It can happen. I mean, there are exceptions. For example, Black-White does have enough allies in it, thanks to the Pacts of Oath of the Gatewatch, that if you do get the good ally synergies, you can totally make it work. I have not had a hard time with my Black-White builds. One of them had 2 Mundus Vanguard in it. And so I was like, well, let's see if we can make this work. And totally, I had plenty of allies in it, and it wasn't an issue to make it work. And I think I've seen a lot of people, kind of try to set that up, the Black-White deck as their base, because it does fit the description of what we're looking for here, right? More of a grindy inevitability style deck. So, Yeah, just don't get caught up. I think I see a lot of people start to walk down that path and then the path ends and then they kind of keep walking anyway. And they just sort of try to force their, whatever Sky Scourer deck through. And it's like, that is just...
Yeah, that's like the poster child for
yes.
what not to do in Sealed. We actually almost built with Sky Scourers a team Sealed of all things until I'm just like, no, we just can't do this. Like, the cards that are bad when your draw is like mediocre or bad, it doesn't work, and the cards don't line up right, are so bad, especially when their opponent can just kill it if they have to, but a lot of times they'll just watch as it does 3 damage to them, and then they win the game with good cards. Right. So an exception to this, or not an exception, but something that works in parallel here is, like you mentioned, Munda's Vanguard. The ally cards actually do work.
Yeah.
Because they're so not dependent on having a whole deck built around them. Like, you could put a Munda's Vanguard or an Ondu War Cleric or a Malakir Soothsayer in your deck, and just a lot of your black and white creatures will naturally be allies. You're not paying huge costs to have them be allies. And if they kill the Soothsayer, then your other cards are probably fine. If they kill your other cards, like, you eventually draw another creature, or you'll have, again, all these cards are like reasonably costed. So
yeah,
I don't mind building the allied deck in Sealed, but in general, I'm not trying to build a super linear deck. And this actually comes up less in Oath anyway, just because there are fewer decks like that. But like a Surge deck is not something I would advise trying to build in Sealed.
No, not going to happen for the most part. All right, what's next?
Well, we're talking about, like, you're playing these like 3-color decks. You're not building aggressive decks. You're clearly playing the removal you can play. It's really important to be able to kill your opponent's great cards. I have to mention that Oblivion Strike and Isolation Zone are what I'm talking about here. Boulder Salvo is a fine card. Touch of the Void's a fine card. You're going to play them if you're red. They don't actually kill the cards that really matter. They don't kill Ruin Processor or Breaker of Armies, cards that actually end games. So even though you're going to play these damage-based removal spells, you're really looking for the unconditional ones. Those are the cards that answer your opponent's great rares.
And for the love of God, keep them in your hand as long as you can. Like, I will take... some damage. I will try to trade creatures. I will do almost anything I can rather than use my Oblivion Strike, because these games tend to go so long that they're going to draw and they're going to find their rare, and you have to have an answer for it. So, I've had scenarios where I've played like a 3-mana creature, reasonable one, maybe even something pretty good like a Vampire Envoy, and have my opponent go land Oblivion Strike, and I'm just like, you are so dead. Like, because I maybe don't have it in my hand right now, but I'm going to find my, my Dread Defiler, or even just my, Ruin Processor, or something not even that exciting, and I'm going to kill you with that, because you have to really regiment out what you're going to use your removal on, and the key is that unconditional removal. I mean, you're just not going to get, you're probably going to have 2 pieces of unconditional removal in your deck, maybe 3, maybe 1, and you have to be really selective about what you use it on.
Yep. So moving away from like deck specific notes, more like format specific notes. I like drawing first. I found that the decks are not fast enough to punish you for that. And the extra card is pretty important. One of the consequences of playing a 3-color deck is, first of all, you want to draw your colors, which does tend to slow down your curve, and your opponent, if they're doing the same thing. Again, both players, I think, are happier on the draw.
Okay. Yeah, I tend to play first, but honestly, I haven't played around with it. I play first as a default. I generally think, that playing first is better. I think that's been proven, but this does seem definitely like this format has all the earmarks of a format that would be fine with being a default draw. It
does depend on your deck some. I will admit that I probably tend to draw a little bit more than I should, but if you have decent 2 and 3 mana plays, especially ones that can interact, then drawing is actually pretty good. You would much.
So when wouldn't you draw?
If your deck really does start at 4 and has just a couple 3s and no 2s, you probably can't afford to draw. You've kind of given up that privilege by building a deck full of expensive cards. If you play against an opponent who's aggressive, you have more information in game too.
Okay.
So those are the main times I would choose to play first.
All right.
So another thing to note is that you're going to see fewer red cards than you will most of the other colors. It just seems like the red doesn't synergize all that well. Part of it is that if you look at the red commons, there are cards like Goblin, Free Runner, and Zada's Commando. I mean, Zada's Commando is a fine card. You'll play it in your sealed deck, but these are just aggressive cards. And people aren't building aggressive decks. Red just doesn't tend to combine well with the other colors.
Right. I found red to be distant fifth in the sealeds that I've done, both playing with and against. There's a few cards that I'll splash for. We've mentioned a bunch of them on here, mainly removal spells. But even then, like this is where, when I think of this format, and this is true of most sealed, I would say that this falls into the classic slow sealed format that we kind of talk about on the show as the default. Sometimes they have a synergistic deck. For the most part, though, it's just your cards are going to stand on their own, and you have to have a good long-term game plan and the ability to make the game go long. For me, it's like the red cards end up being lower impact. And it's a weird thing because I would say probably the biggest change that I have from a card evaluation standpoint for sealed here versus draft is that with draft, I think I'm the most interested in efficient cards. Efficiency really rules the day for me. That's where a great example is the card you just said, Zada's Commando. Very efficient Magic card, right? You're getting a great body for the price with some nice upside in the later part of the game. And that's really what I want. I want as much of that kind of efficiency as possible. But the truth of the matter is that when you look at a card like Zada's Commando, it's still a 2-mana spell that exceeds its 2 mana by a little bit, but almost any 3-mana spell is going to be better than it. One that you're going to play in your sealed deck. Almost any. I mean, there's just not that many, and even the mediocre ones are going to just outrank a Zada's Commando on the board. And for me, that's what I want. I want to be the person with the more powerful cards, period, even if they're a little bit less efficient. If I am playing red in my sealed deck, I probably would end up playing the Commando. It's probably worth it for where it sits. But I think it's a good poster child for the type of thing I don't want to be doing. I don't want to play a deck that's just a bunch of Zada's Commandos and sealed. I just don't. Somebody's going to play a 1/4, and I'm going to be like, well...
They're going to play a Cultivator Drone. You can't attack into it. Then They're going to cast their good cards with it.
And then they just start casting 5-drops and 6-drops and 7-drops, and you're just dead. And that plays out pretty consistently in this format. Remember when we first were looking at the set, and we were like, there's a lot of 2/3s in this format? Man, they all come out to play in sealed. It's all 2/3s because a lot of the utility cards are 2/3s, and then there's even 1/4s that appear. And then once you get up into the 4 and 5 mana slot, everything outranks those. So I tend to weight my cards based on impact rather than efficiency up to a point, right? I mean, I'm not willing to pay 8 or 9 mana for a card that's not going to put me in a strong winning position just because it happens to have more impact. But I do tend to value that impact more than the efficient packages. So especially if they can help me block or make the game go longer, that's what I want.
Yeah. One thing to note about this format, because a lot of things we're saying, are typical of many sealed formats, is that there aren't very many ways to get card advantage here.
No, this is a big difference.
Yeah, part of it is that comparative analysis, the common blue draw spell is just bad. I still think pretty bad even in this format. Mm-hmm. It just 4 mana to draw 2 cards is just not a good deal. So when you find good sources of card advantage, we're talking cards like Prophet of Distortion, Baloth Null Drifter, Ugin's Insight. It's rare, but it is a great card.
Oh, but it's definitely on the list.
And when you find good sources of card advantage, awakened cards like Sheer Drop is a way to get an edge. You really should try to play them if you can, because you're going to run into a lot of decks that are just like, well, I'm playing these like 3-color deck full of powerful cards removal. I don't actually have a way to draw extra cards. So if you can draw 2 to 3 extra cards, then we can trade removal spells and threats, and you'll just have 2 extra cards, and you'll probably win on the basis of those cards. Totally. So Malakir Soothsayer, another one that I think is quite good. Yes. And it's just interesting that there's just not as many ways to draw cards as you would expect in a sealed format that is otherwise, fairly slow and grindy.
Yeah, it's funny. Prophet of Distortion is a great example of it. I played that.
I would splash that card. I think
totally, because again, like I said, I want cards that have impact, which that one doesn't, at least in an immediate sense. But the other side of the coin is I want inevitability, and I want my deck to, if the longer the game goes, the better chance my deck has of winning, and that can come in many different forms. There's not a ton, but there are quite a few. That's one of them. right? Getting an active Prophet of Distortion going is totally inevitability. I had a game where I played against a player. We're at like 21 and 20 life respectively. Both have 5 or 6 creatures on the board, and I play Prophet, and my opponent goes, I don't think I can beat that. They were ready to scoop it up right there. Just like, nope, not going to beat that, because I could activate it once, and then if I found a land, I could start activating it twice. And then sure enough, they didn't beat it. Like the card is completely insane. I was drawing, 2 extra cards a turn at one point. And my opponent had used up their removal to, kind of get the board stabilized. So, inevitability is a big, big deal. And part of what gets you that is card advantage. There's other ways to get it too. We like to call it virtual card advantage, or at least a lot of people like to call it that. And, these are ways that you can generate more and more like board presence for free, if you will, like without costing you a card out of your hand. Maybe it costs you some mana, but maybe it doesn't. Mana sinks are a big one for this. The Prophet is one of them, but there's quite a few cards that let you either leverage your board position or your mana in an effective way. And then you mentioned some of the more direct kind of card drawing type things like the Baloth Null Drifter, just refilling your hand and kind of overwhelming your opponent with just sheer number of cards. These are all good ways to go.
Yeah, it's funny because sure, you would always try to play Baloth Null in sealed because it's such an obviously good card. It's just actually extra good in this format because your opponent's just frequently not going to have a good way to deal with it or deal with extra cards. And you mentioned Pulse of Marasa earlier. That's a kind of card. First of all, everyone's estimation of Pulse has just gone up, I believe.
I think so too,
because the card ended up being great. But second of all, in sealed, when you have creatures that are bombs, then Pulse actually starts to pull me into green specifically.
Yeah, it's funny. That actually comes up a lot too. You mentioned, 2 of the premier removal spells in the format, the black and the white removal spell, so Isolation Zone and Strike. And it is funny because both of those are very big no-nos on the Null Drifter / Pulse plan. They definitely take you out of that. And I think that's interesting to me. Like that's a real cost here, is that you just really hope they don't have the Oblivion Strike. And again, when I'm playing these games, I'm thinking long-term. Like I'll play my bomb and I'll be like, don't have Oblivion Strike. Like you can kill it some other way. I don't care, but just don't Oblivion Strike it, or, cause then I can't get it back later when I draw my null or whatever. And that does pop up pretty often.
And, do you have any other things that you've noticed throughout your sealed experiences?
Yeah. Here? So, the beatdown card's bad. We talked about that. Cards like Core Scythe Master often just won't make the cut. Because again, the boards tend to stall out, and that type of card isn't great. 1 point flying, yeah, it's still damn good, man. It's still, after all these years, good old flying. One of the most simple mechanics they've ever made is still excellent. I said I wanted inevitability. I said I wanted the ability, to go long into the game and win. And flying is one of the few ways that you can punch in damage that you wouldn't normally. Because I'm telling you, with all the toughness in the format, the ground gets locked down pretty quickly, even for big creatures. So if you have some flyers or ways to get up in the air or any type of evasion, that is one thing that you can absolutely leverage. Negate, it's good. You should main deck it. I have yet to be unhappy main decking a negate. You do have to, it counters some of the bombs in the format, which is really nice. Just because that isn't always the case. But your planar outbursts and such, Serpentine Spike or even those type of cards, you can just counter them. And that's really nice. But also everybody's playing every Oblivion Strike that they open, and every Isolation Zone and all that stuff. And if you get yourself into a stalled out board, it can often be useful to wait an extra turn or two to cast your bomb so that you can leave up negate. Because again, it's about inevitability. When I play my bomb, I actually assume that it'll get killed, right? And I think that's a fairly safe assumption that, they're going to have a removal spell for the first big play that you make. That is pretty common for that to happen. I think what you should ask yourself is, can your deck still win? Right? You need backup bombs. So, you want to look for those ruined processors and that kind of card in your pile that can still finish a game, even if your big splashy, finisher ends up getting killed. I try to have, again, it's all about inevitability. I want to be able to win a game where it goes really long. I mentioned mana sinks as well. Depleter is still insane. Slip through space is a way you can get a little bit of extra damage in the late game. I wouldn't prioritize it, but it is something that you can do, later in the game as well. One thing I've noticed, Luis, I've really favored hard counters like Negate and Void Shatter over the soft counters like Spell Shrivel and Horribly Awry or God forbid, Abstruse Interference. The games have gone long enough that my opponents have had mana, like where they could even play something kind of expensive and still pay for a Spell Shrivel. I almost view Spell Shrivel in like the tempo camp at this point, at least for sealed, where I'm like, I want to get a board presence and Spell Shrivel something important and then, hit my opponent again, that kind of thing. And that just doesn't come up that often. With the board getting stalled out,
Yeah, counter spells tend to be pretty good in sealed, but like you said, the mana based ones are not as interesting.
Right. I mentioned before, I really like being greedy in the format. Don't take that too far. I don't say that too often, but like I said, most of my decks have been 3 colors or 2 colors and colorless. Almost every single one of them has. I think you are going to get the green light to do that most of the time, and I think you should. I think you should play your most powerful subset of cards that you can reasonably cast, and I think you should assume that the game's going to go long enough for you to cast them. I think that's really, really important, for how to approach the format. And again, I said it before, but you usually will have enough colorless lands in your pool too. The number that you end up getting is quite high, considering that there's wastes in there, which I haven't even had to play a single waste yet, and I don't plan on it. I don't think that card's very good, but with all the other repeatable ones, I think you can get the job done. Yeah, the format's slow, man. It is not fast. It is very archetypical of sealed. You want to be greedy. You want to go big. You want to own the late game. You want to assume that you're going to get to the late game, which is why I think I like your idea of drawing first, because I do think that you're going to get there for the vast majority of the time.
Yeah, and there's not a whole lot that's groundbreaking here compared to other sealed formats. I think it's worth noting that splashing is good, and you should try to do it.
Yep.
It's worth noting, as always, you shouldn't try to build an aggro deck, and then unconditional removal is good, counterspells are good. But I still like to review it and make sure, check our assumptions here, because every now and then you're going to encounter a sealed format that these are not true, and we're going to hopefully identify that and let you know about it.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so let's cut it there. Oh, I did want to say one thing, actually. I have found black to be very good. Blue, black, and black, green have been very good for me. I've also played black, white with the whole allies thing going on and some removal. And then, like I said, I've generally splashed out of all of these decks too. So keep that stuff in mind as far as colors go. Those are just happen to be the colors. I mean, the sample size isn't big, so I'm not trying to, get on the soapbox too much here, but they have been good for me in the early stages. So keep an eye on that. And red has been easily the worst color. I have barely even splashed. I think I only splashed for Fall of the Titans or something like that.
That'll be the card.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to now switch the conversation over to Team Sealed. And I'm going to kind of hand the reins over to you, Luis, because I have not done, I was considering going to DC, but the team didn't really quite come together and I've decided not to go. So I haven't done any Team Sealeds for this.
So I'm going to grab the reins and entwine it.
You are going to grab the reins and yeah, ride free, young one. Go.
Young one, wow. Anyways, so Team Sealed's interesting because it is sealed. You open packs and you build decks out of them, but it's closer to draft than it is to sealed in terms of what the quality of the decks look like. But it's
and the composition of the decks too.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's different from both. So it's a weird space where, on average, the decks are very good. Splitting 12 packs between 3 people, it means you end up with much, much better decks than in a normal sealed. And in some ways, better decks than draft.
Yeah, oftentimes.
Yeah, so it's with, operating under some restrictions. So your goal is to make the 3 best decks possible, and you've got an hour to do it. So I do have to reiterate, practice really helps here because an hour is not a long time. It's a long time for a normal sealed, right? If you had an hour to build a normal sealed deck, you'd be in great shape. And if you had, even with half an hour, it feels like you're in pretty good shape most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're building a team sealed, an hour feels like, holy crap, there's only 10 minutes left.
Yes, it goes by very quickly.
Yeah, so
many cards to sort, right? I mean,
definitely. So here are some of the features of team sealed. Like normal sealed, every deck will have removal, but even more so in team sealed because you get to concentrate it. You get to split it up as you please and make sure that every deck has it. Each deck's going to have good, solid finishers and bombs, and you're going to actually face real aggro decks. From my experience, I think you're going to face one aggro deck is the most likely number per team, but some teams will have 2. You're very unlikely to see 3 aggro decks.
Okay.
So first, let's do some step by steps, because I like laying things out this way, and then we'll go into kind of what strategies for building decks. So step 1, you open and sort. Each player does this, and at a Grand Prix, then you're gonna get a pre-sorted pool by whoever was sitting like across from you, because the packs you open, you just verify and then you pass them across. But either way, all 3 players need to sort, and this is where the taking out the chaff really, really matters. This is more so than regular sealed, a good time to try to cull as many of the weak cards as possible. And you're gonna end up looking through these cards. Sometimes you're gonna play some of them, but you really want to take out all the cards that aren't decision makers.
Okay.
You want to sort by color, and you want to lay out the gold cards and the bombs first of all, because gold cards are even more important here than a normal sealed too, because you have the opportunity to play more of them. You know, if you open a great blue-green card and a great black-white card in a normal sealed, you're just never going to play both. But in team sealed, you can very easily play both. So your goal when you're building your team sealed deck is to play every single great card and as many of the good cards as possible. There's just no way to open a team sealed and end up with a Gideon or a Fall of the Titans not in someone's deck.
Right.
There are ways to open the right combination of gold cards that not all of them get played, and sometimes that just happens.
So you're saying that the challenge here is to find homes, like reasonably split these cards up among the players?
Yeah, so the challenge is to make the 3 best decks possible. One thing that I found people try to do too often is like, well, our pool isn't good, so we'll make 2 great decks and 1 bad deck. The reason that doesn't actually end up working very well is because a good deck, let's say a good deck is going to have like a 60% win percentage, and a bad deck is going to have like a 45% or a 40% win percentage. You can easily drop that 40% to like 20%, but it's really hard to get that 60% to like 80% just because of how the game works. Mm-hmm. So just because at some point you're going to have too many good cards to fit in 2 decks, so it's just not going to help to cram more and more in there.
Right.
Once your 22nd card and your 26th card are equally good, you're not getting extra value by having those as options. Mm-hmm. So try to build 3 good decks, and sometimes you have to build 2 great decks and a good deck, because you can't build 3 great decks, but 3 good to great decks is your goal here. Start looking at archetypes. You've got the cards laid out, you got the bombs laid out, and the gold cards. Assign each person to build the first pass. And I say first pass because I've never done a team sealed where we only built 1 set of decks and then we're like, yep, we're good.
Yeah, that never happens, does it?
If you did that, then you built
you
too
may have
quickly,
left something on the table,
and you should consider something else. Like, I mean, I've done a lot of team sealeds, and my team has done pretty well. And I never think that we just get it right on the first time and we shouldn't check our work. So if you think that, then you have more confidence than I do. Let's just put it that way.
That's not true. We know that.
I'm confident that that's not true. So you need to look at your decks, and again, like when you open 2 black-white gold cards, then have someone start by building a black-white deck. You also, this is where having familiarity with the draft archetypes really helps. Because again, you're looking closer to that than you are sealed. You're trying to say like, okay, I know what a blue-green devoid deck is supposed to look like. I know what a black-white allies deck is supposed to look like. I know what a red-white aggro deck is supposed to look like. Let's try to build these decks. Mm-hmm. You'll notice that there are 5 colors and there are 3 people. One of the colors is going to get doubled up on, unless you build a monocolor deck, which is not really all that likely. But so just know that you're going to have to split a color. Step 4 is you built your first set of decks, mix it up and try other combinations. And this is more where you're like, well, what happens if we just abandon the idea of playing Cliffhaven Vampire? We're forcing a black-white deck here. It's actually much better if we build like white, green, and black, blue instead.
Right. So but give up that 1 gold card or whatever.
Right. And this is where having people with good memory helps. Sometimes you're going to run out of time during this step and realize, or be done, close to done with it, but realize that your first set of decks was better. So having a good memory to be able to reassemble them is very, very important.
In case you say, no, those first ones were better, but what were they?
Right. You built 3 decks. You're like, all right, well, time to check. Let's build a second set of decks just to see if these look better. Oh, crap. No, the first ones are better. And we have, 9 minutes left and we have to register.
To build all 3 and register.
Again, if you're playing at the Grand Prix, remember, you have to register. So
yes.
Step 5, register and double check. Maybe you run out of time and you can't double check, but really you should have enough time. Getting yourself a game loss in a team event is about the most embarrassing and depressing thing that can happen during the tournament, so don't do that.
Right, and it is completely avoidable.
Yes. So those are the kind of steps that we would go through. To get to more specifics, here's kind of the things I found so far. And again, I don't think that I've like done enough sealed that I know what everything's going to look like. And team sealed's really flexible. There are a lot of different ways you can go. You know, one of the ways we practiced is we got 2 teams, and these weren't even the teams that were actually playing the GP. There's just the 6 people from our work who are going. 3 of us built. You know, we each opened a pool. We all built. Then we disassembled our decks, switched pools, and built again. And by doing that, we got to then discuss.
So one team got the exact same pool that the other team got, and then
right.
you saw what the differences were with what the teams came up with.
So team 1 opened 12 packs
cool.
and built 3 decks, while team 2 was opening 12 packs and building 3 decks. After both teams were done, they took pictures of all the decks, sorted all the cards by color, and switched pools, and then built again and did the same thing.
That's really cool.
And that takes more people. But, you know, honestly, the other thing is you don't have to have 3 on each team. You can build the sealed decks, you know, with 2 people or even by yourself. Actually, before Grand Prix Nashville last year, the team sealed, myself and one of my coworkers, Brandon Nelson, we opened a pool, built all 3 decks, opened another pool, built all 3 decks, then played all the decks against each other. Just the 2 of us. So that was I thought very valuable practice. So don't let it be an excuse that like, oh, my whole team's not here, or oh, my friend's not getting here till, you know, the end of the week or whatever. It's just you can practice these things. So
was there big differences? I'm just curious.
Were there big differences when the teams built the decks?
Yeah, when you guys swapped.
Yeah, yes, actually. So it was a team of myself, Josh Utterlayton, and Brandon Nelson again, and we built 3 decks, and then Chapin, Dan Burdick, and Matt Nass built 3 decks, and we actually had like they built a more aggressive version, they had a different aggro deck in one of the pools, and we came to like a white-green control deck, which is a little strange, but we thought it was actually pretty good.
Yeah, seen that
yeah.
once.
And they didn't like that. So, but it was interesting to talk about the differences. That's the key part. It's not who's right that we were. It's what the differences are between the different strategies and why we would choose to do this, because that gives us some insight. Okay. So the first deck, and this is the one I'm most confident you're just like almost always going to have, which is a blue X Devoid deck. Part of the reason that this is going to happen is, first of all, the best blue common is Blinding Drone, which really pushes you in this direction. And then Cultivator Drone's actually excellent in Team Sealed because it's a great way of playing all your good colorless cards. Mm-hmm. And X, you know, the second color is going to be green or black, I believe, almost every single time.
Okay.
Green, it gives you Stalking Drone, and it's a common, whereas black doesn't have any common that compares. Like Kozilek Streaker is a fine card, but Stalking Drone is just out of this world. So green-blue is a color combination that's going to come up if you open enough Stalking Drones. Black has 2 really good uncommons, Essence Depleter being the better one, and a Havoc Sower being decent. And if you open those, you might be pushed more towards black. And of course, you know, your rares can pop up too.
Yeah, I like both of those cards a lot. Yeah,
a Bearer of Silence, for example. But
sure.
These decks tend to be heavy blue and green or black, depending on which is the better support color. And I also think you really just want to have one colorless deck. It's not that you don't have enough colorless.
You mean
lands.
only one of the decks that utilizes like the bulk of your colorless cards?
Right. Of the 3 decks, I think only one wants colorless.
Okay. Uh-huh.
It's not that you don't have enough colorless lands. Like you noticed, you know, you get 4 more sources a lot of the times, especially open 12 packs instead of 6, so that translates into even more.
Yeah.
It's more that splitting the colorless lands and the colorless cards, I just don't think that makes that much sense, especially since if you put them in the blue deck that then takes your cultivators and your Hedron crawlers, it just has an actual good mana base. One of the decks we looked at building in one of our pools is because we had a ton of black aggro Devoid cards with Vile Aggregate and Eldrazi Obligator, 2 good red cards. Mm-hmm. It's like, what if you build this like red-black Devoid deck? The problem is that deck, it couldn't play any of the creatures that tap for colorless, and if it wanted to play 4 colorless lands, the mana base basically just didn't work. And there's just no excuse to having a horrible mana base like a 7/7/4 or 8/6/4. First of all, the deck didn't even want 18 lands. They actually really wanted 17 lands, so 7/6/4. I mean, that's just awful. There's no reason to do that in Team Sealed. You can just make a good deck with good mana. Yeah. So the blue deck has that good mana because of Cultivator and because a control deck wants to play Hedron Crawler and aggro deck doesn't. So I have to recommend against the colorless beatdown deck. Sky Scourer, again, not a good card.
Trap,
no,
yeah.
Yeah. So the blue Devoid deck is going to be one easy way to kind of like shunt a lot of cards in that direction. I don't think you split blue as a result.
All right.
I don't think blue's deep enough to split. It doesn't really have an incentive to. Once you remove Blinding Drone and Cultivator Drone, put as one deck, what is your other blue deck going to look like?
Right.
A second deck that I think is going to come up fairly often, but not as often, is White-Black Allies. Clearly, this is a great deck. This deck has, a good controlling aspect. It has a lot of good synergy, good removal. One disadvantage is that you don't actually want this deck to play 3 Isolation Zones and 2 Oblivion Strikes, because someone else needs that removal too. Every deck should have a way to kill Guardian of Tazim when that pops up.
Right.
And then the last and the most challenging deck to figure out is where red goes. Because, you said when you did your individual seals, you just didn't like playing red. Well, you kind of have to. you can't just not play a color. Maybe you can. We have done that before, but it's just really difficult to pull off. So you've got to figure out something to do with red. And the best solution I've been able to come up with in the ones I've done so far is either red-green or red-white. I still don't like black-red. I still think the mana just doesn't work to make all the cards work. So unless you open some, an Evolving Wilds and a Cinder Barons or something.
Sure.
But red-green or red-white aggro, you can build a good aggro deck. With 12 packs, you should get enough 2-drops that you can actually build an aggro deck.
Yeah, red-green seems really strong as far as within that little realm. Just because it isn't quite as all-in on the curve-out, small creature type thing. It can also pack some pretty big punch with Tajuru Path Wardens and whatnot, and kind of get in there in the later part of the game in a pretty meaningful way.
Yeah. It's the sort of thing where sometimes I think you will be able to build a red control deck, like, blue-red or even like black-red control, where the mana gets significantly better. Like, once your black-red deck can play Seer's Lantern and Hedron Crawler without wincing, then you actually have a decent shot at black-red. We built black-red control in one of the seals. But I think that red aggro is going to be the most likely scenario. So my best guess of the 2 most common splits among the teams, and this is, by the way, I think a lot more predictable than like something like Origins Team Sealed, where Origins, since you could just combine any 2 colors almost without worrying about what they were, you ended up with much more variation from pool to pool. Here, because of just the themes that are so strong in certain colors, I think you're going to have more repeat color breakdowns. Though again, don't hold these as gospel. Don't think like this is how you have to do it. These are just what I found to be the most common, which is blue-black as your devoid deck, and then white-black, whereas the blue as allies, with blue-black not taking very many of the black cards, it's just heavy blue.
Okay. And
then red-green as the beatdown deck.
Yep.
Or blue-green as the devoid deck. Again, white-black as allies, and then white-red as the beatdown deck, splitting the white. Where you can put the controlling white cards, like you can put Gideon's Reproach and Smite the Monstrous, and Emeria Shepherd or whatever expensive cards into your white-black deck, with the low-curve cards going in white-red. Another one is blue-green devoid, but just the devoid cards only just taking Stalking Drones and other like really key devoid cards, and still having red-green because the blue-green deck doesn't really want Saddleback, for example.
Okay, and interesting to note there the white-black allies deck in the middle there on both of those. Just too hard to break up that combo, right?
Yeah,
the cards are so not that great with other colors.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be this combo. You can very easily not have it.
No, but I've covered big tournaments like this before, and you do see patterns like how you're describing. It's not that there's always exceptions, but you absolutely will see, everybody has a white-green deck. Everybody, there's formats that break down in that way. And I wouldn't be surprised at all to see that the pattern that you've laid out here, where many, many teams play white-black together and then surround them with like a colorless deck and an aggro deck or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that you're going to see white-black and then blue devoid kind of, being the 2 pillars of a lot of these teams. Okay. And, sometimes one of the rewards of Team Sealed is being flexible, and that's what practice really helps, because it gives you experience with figuring out ways to adjust to different kinds of pools, because this is still Magic, just opening random packs of cards, and sometimes you're just going to have different pulls than what we're describing. So being able to know that, like, white-green control is a deck you can make, or like black-red control or something along those lines, or like blue-black devoid aggro, perhaps. I don't know about that. So I think that there's a lot of different directions you can go. Okay. So some takeaways here is...
I had a question first.
Sure.
Yeah, so when it comes to removal, like especially when you're talking about the white-black deck, I'm assuming it just doesn't default get all the white and black removal, right? That's good, because it does tend to have some of the best... What's your like philosophical approach to distributing that removal? Because there's the catch-all removal that we talked about, right? Your Oblivion Strikes in your isolation zones, and then there's your more conditional removal, your Immolating Glares and Gideon's Reproaches and that kind of thing. which type of deck wants what, and how would you approach distributing that removal?
The most important thing is to make sure that each deck has at least one or two answers to kind of absurd cards.
You're looking to balance it out.
Yeah, you don't want to be caught dead to like an Eldrazi Displacer. Just like, well, can't win. Like that's bad. You also have to look at the removal that makes sense in the context of each deck. Gideon's Approach is better in a control deck that wants to leave up its mana and doesn't care about like the fact that this removal spell doesn't actually clear a blocker out of the way. Obviously, Immolating Glare falls into that category as well.
Right.
You have to look at mana curve. Like, you probably don't want 3 Oblivion Strikes and 2 Isolation Zones in the same deck just because they all cost 4. Like, you would rather kind of try to lower the curve on one deck and give another deck a little bit more unconditional removal.
Okay.
And then the control decks need removal more because they are going to drag the game out longer, going to have to deal with the more expensive cards, have to deal with 8 mana cards, whereas the aggro decks, I mean, yes, they would like a Isolation Zone or a Smite, that's fine, but your opponent can just die with a Breaker of Armies in hand a lot of the time, so you're not it's not as needed.
Okay, and then the other thing I wanted to ask about were sideboards.
Oh yeah, that's an important one.
It's a big one, yeah.
So each person gets a sideboard, and once you split up the cards that go in those sideboards, then you can't switch them anymore. So the first thing to make sure is that, well, first of all, if you're the only blue player, maybe you get all the blue cards. Though you can actually look at splash sideboard cards, though that's not something that comes up all that often. Like maybe the white-green control deck wants like a negate in its sideboard or a dispel in its sideboard if it has like a white-blue duel and it can side it in for like a control matchup. But for the most part, split them up by color. And then, when you have 2 people in the same color, make sure they each kind of have their bases covered. One person doesn't need 4 enchant removal cards in their sideboard. Just do 2 and 2. And if you're a control deck, maybe you're the one who should get the Rising Miasma or the Flaying Tendrils. If the other person's an aggro deck, they should probably just get the cards that don't punish aggro decks. So for the most part, sideboard is not that hard. Also, you find the person who writes the fastest and then give them all the crap because they have to register it.
Oh, sure. Super tip. Okay, cool. So what were the takeaways then from Team Sealed?
I really think it's going to be hard to get away from blue to void. I don't think that most decks are going to. Maybe some will. Again, it's not a hard and fast rule, but I think blue to void. A lot
of blinding drones out
there.
Yeah.
I don't think you want to try to split the colorless either. I think it could happen, but it's just not going to happen very often. And I think the blue to void deck is going to be most frequently paired with green or black.
Okay.
Again, you could pair with other colors. You get an Eldrazi Displacer and things change a little bit, but for the most part, green or black along with your blue.
Yeah, I'd predict black being the pretty heavy favorite there too.
The next most common color combinations seem to be white-black, white-red, and red-green as just potentials. Like white-black seems like it's going to show up a lot, and then red is going to be, I think, often paired with white or green as an aggro color. I just don't see red-blue Surge being all that often, especially since, first of all, it's not a real deck to begin with, and second of all, the void deck just wants the black or green card so much more. Split up removal. Each deck does need answer to bombs. And then one other point is that I still think you want to expect 1 aggro deck per team with maybe a cap of 2. So kind of pay attention to what your teammates are facing. If someone's curving out to your teammate on the left there, your opponent probably not going to do the same. So it is worth just trying to figure out what's going on. Also, when you see a devoid deck, then maybe you're even if you're playing against, say, like green or black, you're probably not playing against the devoid cards. So just pick up those cues if you can. Okay.
Yeah, good stuff. I know that a lot of our listeners are going to be there in DC. Luis, you're going to be there battling with Eric and Ben, right?
Yeah, Eric Froelich and Ben Stark. We're hoping to improve on our finish from last time.
You don't have a long way to go. Yeah, you guys, that is one incredible team of limited players right there. Unfortunately, no coverage there, so we're going to have to be paying special attention to your Twitter. So you're going to be updating us on how the tournament's going?
Yeah, that is
no buys. So
no buys. There are no buys at a Team Sealed Grand Prix.
Yeah, so we will expect bright and early updates from you or Ben, if he remembers that he still has a Twitter account.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. I would check my Twitter.
Yes. All right, so that's going to do it, though, for Sealed. Again, if you want to get good practice, and also, I got to say, just a sweet online Magic experience, you should check out the Sealed Leagues. They are a long time coming back. They used to exist, and they haven't for a really long time, and they were sorely missed. They are really one of the killer apps about playing on Magic Online, and I think it's going to be something that's very popular. I mean, they just went up today, and they've already got like 3,000 people in the league. They're very popular, and once you do one, you'll find out why. They're really fun, and again, a great way to practice sealed. That is going to do it, though, for this week on Limited Resources. I want to remind you that the show is brought to you by channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out for all of your Magic needs, including selling your cards. You can take all those sweet draftwares that you've gathered, and you can send them off in the mail to Channel Fireball. They're going to give you a hefty bonus if you're trading them in, or they can just give you cash if you'd rather have that. And it's a nice way to sort of, the circle of life. The rares flow back to CFB, where the constructed players will be snatching them up, and you can turn them into more booster packs or whatever. And so check out channelfireball.com. And for social media stuff, if you want to find us on there, you can find me, Marshall_LR, and Luis LSV on Twitter. You can find a link to all of this stuff. It's kind of like a hub for all the Limited Resources stuff on lrcast.com. That has links to Facebook page, YouTube channel, our streams, the Patreon, everything. It's all there on LRcast. You can also listen to the latest episodes of the show and even find the Crack-A-Packs. You can vote on the LR blog. I put up every Crack-A-Pack with a little poll, and you can vote for what you would pick out of that and see what the rest of the listeners would. And yeah, of course, like I said too, there's also a link to the LRcast subreddit as well, which is a great place to interact with like-minded value fiends just like you. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the show. Thanks so much for hanging out. We'll see you next week.
So, Marshall, I want to correct an injustice that has stood for many, many years, especially if you grew up in the United States.
Wow, this sounds pretty heavy for a sign-off. I'm in.
And that is the bad rap that Brussels sprouts gets. Now, this sounds random. In fact, it is exceedingly random.
It's very random.
But there's two things. First of all, I think they are undervalued. They wheel way more often than they should.
They're deeply undervalued
in the vegetable draft. Part of it is that I suspect most people who grew up eating them think of them as tasteless, soggy spheres that happen to be like mildly green,
and kind of stink.
Yeah, that's the furthest from accurate. So I want to give credit where credit is due. And the second is that people every now and then, for reasons unbeknownst to me, do ask me for recipes. I'm not going to claim I'm a cooking scientist here. In fact, on the show notes it says claim to not be a cooking scientist. But I've got a couple things going for me. One, I'm well versed in feeding large groups of people with picky appetites, since I have satisfied the demands of my testing team when it comes to meals. And the second is I actually do like cooking. I cook a lot. But that brings us to Brussels sprouts. So,
oh yeah,
they've kind of secretly become one of my favorite vegetables over the last couple of years, and I think it's super easy to prepare them, and they're super super awesome. So I just want to advocate for them and just shout out a really quick recipe because it's really that easy. You peel the outer layer, you cut them in half, you toss them with olive oil, salt, and pepper. Bacon is optional but highly recommended. But if that's not your thing, that's not your thing.
No,
you just toss them, start evenly coated, put them in a 400-degree oven that's been preheated to 400 degrees, and roast them for 40 minutes. About halfway through, toss them over, just like shove them around with a spatula, or not if you're lazy, but you probably should. And that's really it. I mean, you can cook them a little less long or a little longer depending on how crispy you like them. But trust me, they taste amazing. And you would never have suspected Brussels sprouts have the capability of being so good. So it's frequently the thing that I make and have people be very surprised at how good they are. And, I think that people are starting to come around. You see them more often in restaurants now. And this is I think, by far the best way to prepare them. So I did want to let people know that there's a late pick floating around out there that a lot of people are probably overlooking.
Yay, Brussels sprouts.
Also worth noting, you can sub in basically any cruciferous vegetable. That'd be like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, though that actually takes a lot less time to cook. And try it. Let me know if you're a Brussels sprout hater and you try this and it's good. Let me know. I try not to do too many recipes because, again, I figure of the people who listen, there are many hundreds of people who are way better at cooking than I am, but the things that are really easy and I think can level up your game are the sort of things I like to talk about because this was really one of the eye-opening moments when it comes to my, I guess, cooking repertoire.
Yay, Brussels sprouts.